being here. My talk is about technology facilitated abuse and the Internet of Things. I'd say from the talks I have heard so far, this is kind of a very niche topic, but I would emphasize that it's a very prevalent issue. Briefly about our research group, we are based at UCL in computer science, and we look at the intersection of how gender dimension influence the way we design systems, the way we write code, but also the way we design, for example, AI system has impact on the way people, sexuality, their gender, their race, etc. And we're quite an eclectic group. We have people with a background in criminology, we have people with a background in engineering, computer science, maths, mental health, etc. And each one of these wonderful people on this slide does something else, but it all feeds into the larger agenda of studying how digital systems, and I'm referring here not just to Internet of Connected Things, but any form of digital systems, are being misused in intimate partner violence situations. What I'm going to be talking about today are 4 things. Number 1 is, I bet you sitting here, well, either because you got stuck here, or because you are interested in the question of what is tech abuse and what I'm referring to. I'm going to talk briefly about protection because I thought it's always very nice to be in the IoT Security Foundation conference because I have for once the chance to speak to people who develop these things, which is very hard to get to, and talk to a few things that our research has shown that might be of interest for those of you who are on the side of being able to make changes. And an ongoing study that we're doing that might be of interest to you, and just a few last pointers. So, if you have never heard or thought about technology-facilitated abuse, or tech abuse as I've referred to it, it's literally this really big bucket that I always refer to, and if I repeat myself and you have heard me speak again, I'm sorry, I sound like a broken record for the last 6 years. But it's really how devices, accounts, software, and any form of system is basically used in intimate partner violence situations. So you might have heard in the news issues like image-based abuse. Probably you have rather, if you read stuff like the Daily Mirror, heard about it as revenge porn. But it's also things like spyware, stalkerware that you can install on people's phone, GPS trackers like AirTags, tiles, etc. It's also simple things that are not very technically sophisticated, and perhaps that's an important thing to say here. I'm not going to show you fancy code or whatnot. We're looking here at very plain, simple things that are being misused and that weren't designed to be misused in that way. So impersonation, just setting up a bank account, an online bank account, or a company in someone's name can be quite, simply done nowadays, and has absolutely horrendous consequences, financial consequences also for people. Just sending harassing text messages, quite plain and simple, but how can you stop that technically from happening, or unauthorized access? So that's what we are looking at at our research group. And I really want to stress, because in case the question comes up, we're very focused on the intimate, the domestic. We're not looking at employee-to-employer relationships. While that could be a context for IPV, intimate partner violence, we're more kind of, that can come up in our research, but we're really looking at kind of people-to-people in some form of intimate relationship. Connected things, connected people. The IoT Security Foundation is doing this stuff for 10 years, but I think we're now so much more advanced in how we as a society are connected. If you have children at home, or even if you have a partner, or if you're connected with your family, like your parents, your elderly parents, many of us share accounts, devices, passwords, from the simple thing like the Netflix account to simply knowing all the password of your parents because they want you to and they forget about it. So, for example, this is from Malwarebytes. They showcase that every person in a relationship with someone has at least 12 different types of accounts that they're sharing. And you can do perhaps a homework for you on the train today. Think about that, how it applies to you and your life. And that ranges from anything such as household management, like entertainment, if you, as I say, have kids, parental monitoring systems, online shopping, your Tesco or Asda or whatever it is account, health and fitness devices, social media, but yeah, down to the plain phone and tablet, knowing the password, how to do that. I normally always ask people
to kind of briefly go into themselves and reflect. What kind of devices do you actually have at home? And I suspect from the audience here, considering your interest in IoT, I hope you have a few more fancy things than just the phone and tablet. If you could make nearly an inventory list in your mind, what it is, and then ask yourself these 4 questions. They're quite simple, but I think they're quite revealing. Number 1 is, who bought the device and who decided that it was bought? Who set it up? Who currently maintains it? And that, I mean, who knows the password? Whose account is connected to it? Who pays for it? Whose bank account is connected to it? But then the bigger question is, despite all of that, who uses it? So is it really just you, or is it your kids, your partner, your relatives? And lastly, which accounts are logged on, and in what type of priority setting? Any observations that people can immediately think of? It's all you. And can I ask, well, how should I say this? May I ask if you're in a heterosexual relationship? Yeah, thank you. Anyone who would like to share any thoughts that you have on these questions and what I'm hinting at? Yeah. It's interesting that that's, yes, definitely, yeah. That's one way of looking at it. I currently am trying to hint that when I normally do this exercise, we work a lot with domestic abuse charities. As you can envision, the majority of the people in the room are often women. It's their husbands, their sons that are doing all of that. And you use the word lazy. What they're often saying is, I'm not tech savvy. They use other words for it, or they have some form of reasons why they feel like they don't want to engage with it, which is in itself a problem. And I'm not making that like an excuse here, but I'm just saying you can see the pattern in our society. Who is in charge of devices on these stages? And if you think about an abusive relationship in a heterosexual environment, that can lead to quite an avenue of escalation. 100%, yeah. And what we are seeing is a lot of people, in the start of the relationship, perpetrators would purchase the devices, they're the legal account holders, they pay for the device, they just give it to them as a gift. And then, you're dependent on that because perhaps you're financially abused as well, plus, it's just convenient as well, but also often, in our society, women feel like, I don't know how to work tech. And these are things that require societal fixes, but in some ways we also need to think of perhaps some form of technical solutions here as well. So yeah, we look at, I love all that stuff. Anything from lawnmowers we have seen being used to, smoke detectors, whatever. So the list is quite long, and if you think about your household, and you don't have an inventory, or you are the person that says, I don't know I feel not technically capable, plus you weren't the one making the decision in the first place. Perhaps you don't know what in that house actually is listening, what it is data it's collecting, and where it is even placed. So yeah, that was the point about the gender dynamics. A lot of engineers are really focused on security, confidentiality, the whole CIA stuff. But what I think is important is to recognize one area that I think a lot of engineers forget is the third one, which is we are always thinking about a threat actor as someone external. That's like, the hacker, the Chinese, whatever state. But actually, what we're interested in is the person that is in the house with you that might be the threat actor. And that makes technical solutions extremely hard because they have access, not just access on your account, but physical access as well to the information, and they can coerce it physically as well if they need and want to. And I mean, again, this slide is so old, but unfortunately still relevant. We try to communicate like to domestic abuse charities or policy officials, just that they can be camouflaged. I know this sounds funny and simple for people like you, but the questions we often receive are quite simple, and it's the not knowing what is really technical possible that makes the whole situation worse. So camouflage, they have advanced functionalities, and the real big issue is you do not need to be physically present in a person's home to make their life absolutely miserable. And that really is something that IoT or digital system have allowed to happen. And so we talk about the issue of like smart violence or just generally domestic violence, because it enables things like monitoring, knowing what a person does, but also espionage, when they do it and why they do it. So for example, things like, again, this sounds ridiculous, but like a smart fridge, knowing when it's open or what is, with a CCTV camera, whether it actually is being done or not. The persecution, so where they are going, for example, with geolocation. The control, whether and how they have done it, because you can see that the person, for example, hasn't unloaded the dishwasher or done a certain task that you've asked. And I really want to emphasize is the gaslighting and psychological manipulation that goes back to that gender dimension. It sounds simple and, ridiculous, perhaps for some of you here, to think that people might envision or believe or can hypothesize that a smart vacuum cleaner could have a knife in there. But if someone tells you that, and you're in a relationship where abuse is happening, where you in a fragile financial situation, where you manipulate it every day, you start to question that. Is that possible? Could there really be a knife in there? Or is there really a camera in that teddy bear that I was told it is? Would you even have the courage to look in that teddy bear to check? And what would be the consequences of that? So this gaslighting aspect is the biggest one. And I would say in the environment we're in, I say this all the time, both underestimating the capabilities of technology is as dangerous as overestimating it, and perpetrators use that deliberately. They come up with ridiculous things. We're saying, I have a friend who's a hacker, I was at the dark web, all the fancy words that they heard somewhere in the Daily Mail. But they can use this to make someone absolutely fear for their life and not know if it's actually technically possible. So an example we have conducted was just on a study on a smart lock. And I use this example because I think it's so funny, because I bet the developers weren't, I don't see the manufacturer here, but they weren't really thinking this through. So you have a guest and an owner account. There can only be one owner. Why? The idea we're living is one device, one account holder, but this is not how society currently works. So one of the problems here is the owner had more privileges than the other guests in the house. But the thing like a lock, a house is often shared. Why is a lock, a key is shared as well? But in this case, for example, the owner was able to view the account activities, the others couldn't. They could invite owners, others or guests, and they could also remove access. Here, I would say immediately, if I sat on that table when the development was happening, I was thinking, why do you think there should only be one? And is that the right approach to this? I know this is historically how we have thought about devices, one personal PC, personal connected systems, but we're moving into a shared device account system, and we need to change our security solution accordingly. That's as an example. So coming to a few protections that we have come up with and we're working on more for IoT developers. So many of these things, again, I'm not here, showing you some fancy code or some snippet you need to implement in your system, but rather these are design recommendations. You implement more on the feature level. So for example, equality of account owner rights. Simple as that. If you're in the consumer IoT market, that is something you should have on the radar. Why are you thinking there is and should only be one single owner and have abilities that others can't? Consent changes. We are also believing that consent is something that is given by the account holder. But again, in shared device situations, think of Alexa, Google Home, multiple people are using one device. Why are we not thinking of technical solutions where it comes to consent that is being given by all the people about certain things and certain issues? Yes? Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I have been in this space for 6 years. I've heard all the questions. Yes, I know that these solutions are not something that will save and help everyone equally. But for example, nowadays, you are not even prompted, if you're an account holder, to ask about other people in the who are working with. I think one of the... Yeah. I think like one can lean back and say, of course, yeah, well, in a cursive and controlling environment, everything goes. But I feel like many of these solutions will help any consumer on the baseline. And I think it will improve the conversation we're having about consent. Why is it one person in the house that decides what is being purchased and how it is being used and how it's being set up? The IT and phone support is something I'm quite passionate about. You don't know how many victims and survivors are so desperate that they're phoning the companies. And I wonder how many actually have thought about this and what would they do? How would they check? Is actually the victim and survivor calling? Is it a perpetrator who just wants to, find something out? And what escalation processes do you have in place? Again, I'm talking here for companies who are working with consumers. Have you thought about this and how would you deal with that? And lastly, also automatic logout. One thing we're also seeing is, it could be a one-night stand, and I'm seeing I'm running out of time. Thinking about while out of a convenience perspective, you could, stay logged in, re-asking for consent, for example, once you've connected devices, would be something just like reminders, which is the other thing, and visible and audible indicators that something is listening and on, just like you see it with the Amazon Echo that it's logged out. But we did several studies with IoT devices where you had no clue were they now listening, were they recording, that could make it, again, easier understandable for a person what's happening right now. And lastly, also, what is good advice? Because again, the majority of victims and survivors go perhaps online, and how do you know that this is, you end up on a Microsoft forum or on a Reddit thread. How do you know that this is actually good advice? And most people or most companies nowadays, it's very hard to find for my Amazon Echo the actual Amazon indication of how I can change settings anymore. And that should be far easier and found and searched. I could go into some other aspects, but I'm running out of time. But I'm happy to come back to some of these suggestions in the Q&A. But just to say, there are simple, easy, low-hanging fruit, as I always say, things that might not save victims and survivors in super cursive controlling relationships, but at least would perhaps make it easier, and again, would help consumers overall. So I leave it at that. We have an ongoing study on smart hidden IoT devices where we are looking whether IoT systems can be detected by commercially available on Amazon, basically IoT finders or stalkerware, spyware finders. So if you're interested in that, Akhil is sitting here, and we are running this study in support, and we're working with domestic abuse organizations that really ask these questions to us all the time. And yeah, by the way, if you're really interested, there's a really cool IEEE working group on that topic. We're lacking industry representation. And I think it would be important to have more people on the ground who are actually designing systems, thinking about these issues. So I leave it at that. Thank you.